in the misty fields of southwestern Ontario, where the wind whispers through ancient oak trees and the morning fog clings to weathered fence posts. There lies a tale so dark, so haunting, that it has become Canada's most infamous ghost legend. This is the story of the Black Donnellys, a family whose name still sends shivers down the spines of those who dare to speak it aloud in the quiet corners of Lucan, Ontario. The year was 1847, a time when hope and desperation walked hand in hand across the Atlantic Ocean. James Donnelly and his wife Johannah, like countless other Irish immigrants, had fled the Emerald Hills of their homeland, seeking refuge from the crushing poverty, religious persecution, and the devastating potato famine that had turned their once green fields into graveyards of despair. With calloused hands, weathered faces, and hearts heavy with the weight of leaving everything they had ever known behind, they arrived in the promised land of Upper Canada, carrying nothing but their Catholic faith, their fierce pride, and an unshakable determination to carve out a better life for their growing family. In the spring of that fateful year, James Donnelly staked his claim on Lot 18 of the 6th concession of Biddulph Township. Just outside the small settlement of Lucan, the land was wild and untamed, thick with dense forests, tangled undergrowth and swampy patches that seemed to swallow a man's boots with each step. But to James, this wilderness represented something precious, something he had never possessed in the old country: true ownership, a piece of earth that would belong to him and his descendants forever. With his own two hands, James began the back-breaking work of clearing the land, felling massive trees that had stood for centuries, pulling stumps from the reluctant soil, and slowly, methodically, transforming the wilderness into farmable fields. Johannah worked alongside him, her skirts muddy and torn, her hands blistered from endless chores, helping to build their log cabin, tend their meager crops, and raise their children: Tom, Will, John, Patrick, Michael, Robert, and Jenny, in this harsh but hopeful new world. However, the Donnellys soon discovered that their new homeland was not the peaceful haven they had imagined. Biddulph Township was a powder keg of religious tension, ethnic rivalry, and social conflict. The area was divided between Irish Catholics, like the Donnellys, and Irish Protestants, who had arrived earlier and established themselves as the dominant group in the community. These Protestant settlers, many of whom belonged to secret societies like the Orange Order, viewed the Catholic newcomers with suspicion, contempt, and sometimes outright hatred. The religious divide was not merely a matter of theological differences. It was a chasm that separated neighbors, influenced business dealings, determined social status, and even affected which roads a family could safely travel on dark nights. Protestant farmers often refused to do business with Catholic families. Catholic children were taunted and sometimes attacked on their way to school, and Catholic families found themselves excluded from community events, political positions, and economic opportunities. The Donnelly family, with their fierce Irish tempers, their refusal to back down from confrontation, and their determination to stand their ground no matter the cost, soon found themselves at the center of these brewing conflicts. James Donnelly was not a man to be pushed around, intimidated, or forced to apologize for his faith, his heritage, or his right to exist in peace on his own land. This stubborn pride, while admirable in many ways, also made the family a target for those who sought to maintain the existing power structure in Biddulph Township. Land disputes began to plague the Donnelly homestead, with neighbors claiming that James had illegally occupied property that belonged to others, that his surveys were incorrect, and that he had no legal right to the farm he had worked so hard to establish. These disputes were often fueled more by prejudice than by legitimate legal concerns, but they created a constant atmosphere of tension and uncertainty around the Donnelly property. As the years passed, the conflicts escalated from verbal arguments to physical confrontations, from property disputes to outright violence. The Donnelly boys, raised in this atmosphere of constant conflict and taught to defend their family's honor at all costs, developed reputations as hard-drinking, quick-tempered young men who were not afraid to use their fists, or worse, to settle disagreements. Stories began to circulate throughout the township about the Donnelly family's involvement in barn burnings, cattle theft, stagecoach robberies, and other criminal activities. Though many of these tales were likely exaggerated or completely fabricated by their enemies, the situation reached a boiling point in the late 1870s, when a group of local residents, calling themselves the Vigilance Committee, decided that the time had come to rid Biddulph Township of the Donnelly menace once and for all. This committee, which included prominent farmers, businessmen, and even some local officials, met in secret to plan a campaign against the family. They spread rumors, gathered what they claimed was evidence of criminal activity, and slowly but surely turned public opinion against the Donnellys. The committee members convinced themselves that they were acting as righteous guardians of law and order, protecting their community from a family of dangerous criminals who had terrorized the township for far too long. In reality, they were a lynch mob, driven by religious bigotry, ethnic hatred, and a desire to eliminate a family that had refused to conform to their expectations or submit to their authority. On the cold, dark night of February 4, 1880, approximately 30 members of the Vigilance Committee gathered in the winter darkness, their faces hidden behind masks, their hearts hardened by years of hatred and resentment. Armed with clubs, axes, and burning torches, they marched through the snow toward the Donnelly homestead, determined to end the feud that had consumed their community for more than 3 decades. What happened next was nothing short of a massacre. The vigilantes surrounded the log cabin where James and Johannah Donnelly slept peacefully, unaware that death was approaching their door. They smashed through the windows and doors, dragged the elderly couple from their beds, and brutally murdered them with clubs and axes. Tom Donnelly, who was visiting his parents that night, was also killed in the savage attack. The murderers then set fire to the cabin, hoping to destroy any evidence of their heinous crime, but their bloodlust was not yet satisfied. The mob then traveled to a nearby house, where John Donnelly and his cousin Bridget were staying. They broke into this second home and murdered both John and Bridget, bringing the total death toll to 5 innocent victims. The only survivor of that terrible night was young Johnny O'Connor, an 11-year-old boy who had been staying with the family and managed to hide under a bed during the attack, witnessing the entire horrific scene. When the sun rose on February 5, 1880, the Donnelly homestead was nothing more than a smoldering pile of ash and charred timber, with the burned remains of 3 family members buried beneath the rubble. The dream that James and Johannah Donnelly had carried across the ocean from Ireland, their hope for a better life in the New World, had literally gone up in smoke, destroyed by the very neighbors they had tried so hard to live peacefully alongside. The aftermath of the Donnelly massacre was almost as shocking as the crime itself. Despite the fact that young Johnny O'Connor had witnessed the entire attack and could identify many of the perpetrators, despite the overwhelming evidence that pointed to the involvement of the Vigilance Committee, and despite the fact that the whole community knew who was responsible for the murders, justice was never served. The men who were arrested and charged with the crimes were acquitted by juries that included their friends and neighbors, people who either sympathized with their cause or were too frightened to convict them. The silence that descended upon Lucan and Biddulph Township after the massacre was deafening and deliberate. Families whose ancestors had participated in the vigilante mob passed down a code of silence from generation to generation, refusing to speak about that terrible night, denying any knowledge of the events, and ensuring that the truth would remain buried as deeply as the victims themselves. This conspiracy of silence, this collective amnesia, only served to deepen the mystery and enhance the legend of the Black Donnellys. Even today, more than 140 years after that fateful February night, many residents of the Lucan area claim to know nothing about the Donnelly massacre, despite the fact that it remains one of the most documented and thoroughly researched crimes in Canadian history. The ghostly legacy of the Black Donnellys continues to haunt the countryside, where they lived and died. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural beings, but ordinary people who allow hatred and prejudice to transform them into something truly monstrous. The story of the Black Donnellys stands as one of Canada's darkest chapters, a tale that reveals how quickly neighbors can become enemies, how religious and ethnic tensions can poison entire communities, and how the pursuit of vigilante justice can lead to unspeakable tragedy. Their legacy serves as a haunting reminder of what happens when prejudice, fear, and mob mentality are allowed to flourish unchecked in the shadows of rural communities. The wind that still blows across those Ontario fields carries with it the echoes of that terrible night, ensuring that the Black Donnellys will never truly rest in peace. If you found this dark chapter of Canadian history as fascinating and chilling as we did, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with others who appreciate true crime stories and historical mysteries. Do not forget to subscribe to West is Best for more haunting tales from across Canada, deep dives into forgotten history, and stories that will keep you awake long into the night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest explorations into the shadows of the past, because there are so many more dark secrets waiting to be uncovered in the great Canadian wilderness.